Bulavinaka and welcome to For the Record. Fiji, along with the rest of the world, is marking 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Tonight we're going to look at how the media portrays gender issues, gender violence and issues surrounding the treatment of people who don't identify as either male or female. Our guest tonight is the chair of the Media Development Authority, Mr. Ashwin Raj. Ashwin, thank you very much for being with us tonight. Just to kick off discussions, I'd like to get a feel from the Media Development Authority on what the authority believes the state of play is with regards to reporting gender violence in Fiji. Are we doing a good job of it? Are we on the right track? And where are we failing?
Thanks for having me on your show, Edwin. I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that given the surge in incidences of violence and the reporting around it, one of the things that we took full cognizance of was the numerous sort of complaints that we received from members of the public about the ways in which the media was treating these reports of violence. And of course, the first thing of concern to us was basically sort of the identification of the victims of violence and the focus on the gory details, the glorification of violence, and of course our concern is that that kind of focus on glorification of violence actually normalizes practices of violence to an extent that things become salacious, and of course people kind of think this makes a good titillating read without necessarily realizing that this further incriminates victims of violence, diminishes their sense of dignity, and also obstructs the work of the purveyors of law in properly doing their work, because there are huge jurisdictional implications for the work that is being done and how the media actually goes about reporting it. And for us, the concern is whether certain laws have been transgressed. So, for instance, if you look at the Media Industry Development Decree, it has very, very specific provisions around violence, around sexuality. If you look at Section 8 and Section 24 of the Media Industry Development Decree 2010, it specifically talks about things like not to identify victims of violence, not to identify children in particular if they're witnesses, and not to identify victims of violence even if the law permits you to. And there's a good reason why. It also talks about prolonged focus on sexual-based violence and sexuality in the media and the impact that can have, the effect of titillation, so on and so forth. And so I think that it's imperative that the media takes full cognizance of these provisions in the decree. So when we did receive complaints from the police and complaints from the Fiji Women's Crisis Center, together with members of the public, we took that very seriously, and we got in touch with the respective media, and we wanted to actually sort of then say that I don't think as a development authority we should be sitting and waiting for complaints to come. We should be a lot more proactive. And one of the things that we actually did was, in the lead up to the 16 days of activism, we had a major workshop in partnership with DFED on how the media can report responsibly on issues of violence.
It can't all be that bad, though. I mean, you started off by saying that there have been increased reports, and the media would also say that there have been increased reports. And given that these have to be reported, have you seen the media move with the times on a general scale? There may be times reports which don't follow the regulations, but in general, are we moving in the right direction?
The one thing that I can say is there's much more reporting now. So it's not simply the case that Fiji has sort of like an increase in the number of incidences of violence, but the reporting has increased for sure. And so I mean that's an important thing. And given the fact that if you look at our leaders, And even if you look at members of civil society organizations, they've made a very, very solid case about the costs of violence. And in that sense, one of the things that's become very, very clear is that violence is not a personal issue. This is a national issue. And in that sense, given the role of the media in raising issues of national interest, it's absolutely important that the media does talk about it, does report on these things. But how the media goes about reporting it, that's the issue for me. In terms of, following the protocols of responsible journalism, also bearing in mind the profound, implications of that kind of report on the victims of violence, taking into cognizance the fact that, we have to start thinking about the issue of consent if it is a child, because one of the things that happened with that very unfortunate incident, where the school student who was raped, and there are a series of stories, because one of the things that came out was that the nation needs to know, and there needs to be some degree of sort of accountability, and transparency and so on and so forth, and exposing transgressions that took place, plus also whether the police effectively did its work or not, so on and so forth. But at the same time, you have to bear in mind that there are certain protocols that the police have to follow, and they have their own set of rules, and I think the media needs to be fully aware of that, so that they are not obstructing the work of the police. Let them independently carry out their work, but at the same time, report by all means. But how you report responsibly is the issue. And thinking about the welfare of the victim. For instance, they identified the victim. There was, and I'm not going to name media, because this is not about putting them on trial here on this show, but really generally sort of what are the lessons we've learned, right? And identifying the school, identifying where the victim had moved, so on and so forth. In a way, like there's like a GPS, tracking device on the victim, which is a problem. It's further incriminating the victim. It's putting the victim on trial once again. And as you know, this is a very, very traumatic, experience, and nobody would want to put their children through that. So I think that that's the kind of thing the media needs to start thinking about.
Okay, and with that, we will take a break. We'll be right back. Good evening, welcome back to For the Record. We're speaking with Mufti Tariq Said Bujasaim, who's part of a delegation from the United Arab Emirates speaking about Islam and peace and unity, making a number of public engagements in Fiji. Mufti Saab, I'm interested in some of the
religious talks,
aspects of what you've been doing.
So I just mentioned in our previous segment the work we've been doing in terms of poverty alleviation, and the other aspect that we've been trying to touch upon is peace and coexistence in Islam. And to that effect, I've had the opportunity to speak at several schools and to school children, try and give them a positive message about Islam. But more specifically, yesterday we had two talks, one in the morning with various Islamic ulama, scholars from around Fiji, to discuss the need for religious authority. So this talk was specifically about the necessity in the day in which we live for Muslims to be very open and clear in disassociating their religion from the stigma of terrorism. The acts of a small group who are a minority within a minority. They are a minority within the extremist community, and the extremist community is a minority within the Muslim community, are being allowed to hijack our religion through their foul deeds and their evil acts. And so the point of the talk was to get it across to these people who are ulama, they're scholars within the community, so they have an effect on the people that they are going to be, that are around them. The necessity and the incumbency upon us to be very clear in disassociating our religion through what we know of it. They're scholars, so they know that this is not correct, this understanding of Islam. and getting that message across to the general public. When you don't know about something, it's easy to be told anything about it. This is actually also true of a lot of Muslims. If a Muslim doesn't have a good education, it can be very easy for him to get caught up into about his own religion, not about non-religious subjects. It can be very easy to be misled as to what the reality of Islam is.
A little knowledge is a dangerous thing, as they say.
Right.
And so let's bring the teachings of Islam into this discussion. We have the Quran and the Hadith.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we hear of these so-called religious leaders quoting from the Quran and Hadith and saying that there are teachings
Right.
where it says that you may, as a Muslim, take the lives of non-Muslims.
Mhm.
You may also take the lives of Muslims if they have wronged you. So these are the sort of messages that are resonating around the world about Islam from these extremists.
Well, you can take a very general statement, like I'll take take what you just said. You said they say X and then they build upon this Y. So you just said that, you can take the life of a Muslim if he's wronged you. Well, in countries that believe in capital punishment, you can take the life of someone if he kills someone, right? So, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can then take that partial ruling and then expand upon it and say, therefore, you can go and do whatever you want, kill whatever you want, whenever you want. Islam as a religion is a holistic religion, meaning that it addresses all aspects of our life, okay? And so Islam provides for rules of war as it provides for rules of peace, but is the basis of relationships between Muslims and non-Muslims, between the Muslim community and surrounding communities and the Muslim community and with communities that live within the Muslim polity, one of peace or one of war, right? And this is very important to openly discuss. And what I tried to talk about in the other talk that I gave yesterday in the evening, or tried to illustrate, was that the basis for relationships in Islam is peace. Now, this is actually a point that's debated in studies of politics and international relations. Is the basis of relationships between nations one of peace and one of war? And so some people say that actually we're in a continual state of war, and peace is something that comes through peace treaties. But the basis, the foundation of all relationships is war. And then there's another point of view that says that no, the basis of relationships between peoples is peace, and that war is something that happens and crosses the path. Now, the point, what I tried to say to our audience yesterday is that in Islam, the basis of relationships between the Muslim state and others is one of peace, and that religion, that warfare is something that happens when others attack you. And so if the idea of self-defense is enshrined in international law. It's not something that is considered unreasonable by anyone. That if any state is attacked by another state, they have the right to defend themselves.
But how then, Mufti Saab, have we entered a situation, a global scenario where Islam is seen as a religion of war, bearing in mind the actions of ISIS and Boko Haram in other parts of the world?
Well, because ISIS take the other position that I mentioned, because they actually believe in a state of continual war, right? They don't believe that there will, and this is very clear in their actions, they're not opening embassies anywhere, right? Because they believe that they have to continually fight all surrounding states until either they win or they're destroyed. This is their understanding or their worldview. But what I tried to show yesterday is that this isn't a worldview supported by the Quran. In Surah Al-Anfal, Allah Ta'ala says, وَإِن جَنَحُوا لِلسَّلْمِ فَاجْنَحْ لَهَا وَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. And if they incline towards peace, people that are fighting you, then incline you also to peace and depend on God, right? So you depend on God because maybe they won't be sincere in their expressed peaceful intentions. And this is referring to people that are at war with you, right? So what the Quran is telling us here is that the basis is peaceful relations, right? And if it were the case, as they say, that you're in a continual state of war, perpetual war, then there would be no order for you to engage in peace treaties with people that.
But you can't. According to Islam, you can't engage in active warfare. Is that an accurate statement? In terms of what ISIS is doing around the world, is that according to the teachings?
What ISIS is doing isn't active warfare. It's terrorism, right? And I think we have to differentiate between the two, right? So George Bush believed in a policy of preemptive war, okay? And this is actually against, I believe it's against international law. I could be wrong, but and so he ordered. So his declaring war on Iraq was a preemptive strike, okay? ISIS, what they're doing are not preemptive strikes, but they're not attacking military targets. They're attacking civilians. And their basis for that isn't, well, do you want to get into the thought process of ISIS?
They are attacking innocent people.
Because they don't differentiate between combatants and non-combatants.
All right.
And because what they say is that the people that are attacking them don't differentiate between combatants and non-combatants. Right, which is also, I mean...
Let's pause here,
yes.
Tariq, Mufti Tariq Sir. We will take a short break. We'll be right back. Good evening, Fiji, and welcome to another episode of For the Record. Tonight we're talking about Fiji Airways, one of the most successful Fijian companies, and which has recently announced that it is going to be flying to Singapore, our newest destination in worldwide routes that Fiji Airways currently services. And with that, I'd like to welcome in studio with us tonight the newly appointed Chief Executive of Fiji Airways, Andre Villian. Andre, thank you very much for joining us today. Very interesting times for the airline, a new destination announced, but also a few days ago, you were talking about how Fiji Airways is doing and how the 5-year strategic plan is shaping out. I'm interested because you said that the company is stable, it's in good hands, and it's doing well. You've studied the books. How are the finances looking for Fiji Airways in the first place?
Right, let me first of all tell you that I've been CEOs of several airlines, and in each case in the past, these have been small national carriers in deep financial trouble. So I was brought in to do turnarounds, and this is the first time I've joined an airline that is actually doing exceptionally well. And I have to tell you, and I've said this publicly a few times now, Fijians can be very, very proud of where Fiji Airways stands today. I do not know of another small national carrier that is profitable, has cash, and is doing as well as we are. So it's a lot to be very proud of. So, quite honestly, we can't disclose our numbers yet for the year, but we're generally on track for a second good year in a 5-year master plan. So my objective going forward is to continue with that master plan. We enter year 3 on the 1st of January 2016.
So at the end of the 5 years, where do you expect Fiji Airways to be?
Well, the master plan included the acquisition of more aircraft. There's an Airbus A330-300, which we're taking delivery mid-December. Will come into service in 2016, so that's in terms of the master plan. With that comes additional routes, and as you heard yesterday, we announced Singapore. We'll also in 2017 be acquiring an additional Boeing 737-800, which will then be used on what I call the short-haul routes, which are the 4-5 hour type flight routes and shorter.
Well,
and all of this is
yes.
a plan that takes us to more growth, expanding our network. Now, when we talk of network, we mean where you fly to, how often you fly, and the times you fly. That's the network. So we're expanding the network over the 5-year period. In other words, more destinations, expanding the footprint of Fiji around the world, and also has a profit growth plan attached to it.
And with these additional routes and the additional aircraft, is Fiji Airways in a position to sustain all of this growth?
Yes, I believe it is financially. But the one area that we will focus on, and that's what I announced last Wednesday, is whilst we're pursuing and continuing with the 5-year master plan, we need to also ensure that the basics in the business are in tandem with it. So we have an additional strategy we will run in 2016, which I call perfecting the basics. And it makes logical sense that at the end of the day, it's the customer who will make this all happen for us. And the customer needs to be happy with the service. And when you grow as rapidly as we have over the last 2 years, we need to ensure that all the aspects of customer service and other fundamentals in the business are in sync. And that's our strategy. So we've identified a series of areas where we're going to put a lot of attention on the basics in the business. And we've called it perfecting the basics.
So take us through some of the...
Yeah, so I've got a list here. So the first, of course, is we'll reinforce that safety is first in the business. We'll never compromise on safety. And, it is already the culture and already I'll call it the pillar in the business, but we'll just keep reinforcing it.
With regards to safety, there have been incidents recently where flights have been delayed and,
Yes.
and the aircraft has had to be inspected and even sent for repairs. Has that been because Fiji Airways has been in situations that were out of its hands, or do you see that safety has been an issue for the airline for some time?
Let me tell you, a captain will not take an aircraft and take off with it because he is the commander of the flight unless it's airworthy. Our technical will not release an aircraft to the line to fly if it's not airworthy. So if we have a technical, we will ensure that the aircraft does not go to the line. The captain will not take the aircraft if it's not airworthy. We will rather delay the flight or cancel the flight and always put that first. So yes, it does happen. These are machines. And occasionally they break down, and we will and cannot fly the aircraft unless it's airworthy, in which case we will then cause what we call a passenger disruption. So one of the basics that I will cover a bit later on is how you handle a passenger disruption. That has to be done in a way that we use the term turning tragic to magic. Mm-hmm. So you have to really ensure that there's someone who cohesively manages the whole disruption.
This is something that passengers should keep in the back of their minds when there are delays, because
Yes.
there's a lot of frustrations and
Yes.
a lot of anger at people not being able to get where they want to.
Yeah. I mean, it could be a weather delay, it could be a technical, there are many reasons for a delay. But at all times, airlines have this principle, safety first. We will never compromise it, and we will rather have a disruption for the passenger and deal with it properly than have an unsafe situation.
The other incentives, in-flight entertainment, I think, is one of the major
Yes.
focuses.
Well, there's a series. So what we've said is the second core area we'll focus on is the people within Fiji Airways. And here I'm talking specifically more localization. So we have a strong program running on pilots, where currently we have a 55% local, 45% expatriate. Our target is to get that 70-30. So we have a series of initiatives to accelerate the localization of pilots. And an example is we've taken on a group of what we call second officers. They're not flying the plane, they do relief work, but they're sitting building hours. We take them, they've flown small aircraft, they have the hours, they have what we call a frozen ATPL, that's an airline transport pilot license. We send them for conversion, and then they learn. And over time, they will become first officers. We've also got a program with our subsidiary, Fiji Link, where captains on Fiji Link, which are flying turboprop aircraft, jet-prop aircraft, will progress to become first officers on our jets. So we have had 8 already move across, and we have 10 of these second officers, and we also are developing with Fiji University, National University, a scheme to do pilot training and then feed them on our planes. So we're basically accelerating it to get to that 70-30 ratio.
And with that, we've come to the end of our first segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show. We are speaking tonight with the U.S. Ambassador to to Fiji, Ambassador Judith Sefkins. Ambassador, you spoke at length about how Fiji is the hub of the Pacific. It's an integral part of the U.S. reaching into the Pacific and this region as a whole. There are comments, people are talking in many circles that the United States is coming back to the Pacific now because of influences from other parts of the world, the Asian continent, China and India specifically, which have in recent years played a much bigger role in terms of aid, development aid, loans, grants, and sort of being filling a gap that came apparent in the recent years. What do you have to say to that?
I don't think we ever left the Pacific. I think we've always been here. As I said, we are a Pacific country. We have the state of Hawaii, which is very centrally located in the Pacific. We have our Pacific Command, which has been throughout very active in the Pacific. But we do definitely recognize, under President Obama, the U.S. has this policy of the rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. And I think that's a recognition that, the dynamism of this region and, how much of our common future, the engine of growth, I think in large part is in, this part of the world. So I think it's a recognition of that fact.
And geopolitics obviously plays a part. You're talking about international diplomacy. Geopolitics has to be factored in.
Well, it's broad-based, of course, our rebalance. It's looking at, engagement, across the board. And so, of course, yes, that includes our, diplomatic engagement, our military engagement, our economic engagement. So, yes, it's a multifaceted policy.
Fiji water is one product that has made it's made leaps and bounds in the U.S. market and other parts of the world, but that's possibly the number one thing that we are known for. There's obviously going to be a trade imbalance when you're talking about a country like the U.S. trading with Fiji, obviously, but are you looking at ways to maybe have more Fiji products make their way into the U.S. market?
Well, first of all, the bilateral trade between our two countries has actually been increasing. And you may be very happy to know that actually Fiji has a surplus, a trade surplus. You export more Fijian goods to the United States than what we import in terms of American goods to Fiji. I think the total volume last year was something like $183 million worth of goods and services that Fiji exported to the United States. But both the Fijian exports to the U.S. as well as U.S. exports to Fiji have been on the increase in the recent past year. And you're absolutely right that Fiji Water is really been very, very successful. First, very commercially successful, but also very much successful in terms of elevating Fiji's brand recognition in the United States. It's available throughout the United States and restaurants, and in fact, even in the cafeteria of the State Department, it's very prominently available for purchase for all of us when we go down to buy our lunch there. But there are many other areas of many other products that are successful in the U.S. market, including a number of agricultural goods, including, of course, fish products and seafood products, including some wood products and even some manufacturing products. But one of the interesting things I just learned is that there's a growing market for kava in the United States, that there's beginning to be a retail expansion of what they call kava bars. And I was very interested and sort of happy to hear that right now there are 20 tons a month of kava being exported from Fiji to the United States. And we think that that's an area with potential for further expansion.
And is this something that that your embassy is involved in, or do you leave it to the two markets, to U.S. and Fiji markets, to sort themselves out?
No, we are involved. In fact, in August we had a visit from one of our most senior trade policy officials from the State Department, Mr. Kurt Tong, was here, and he met with Fiji government officials. He also was speaking at a conference that the U.S. State Department helped support and organize, that was organized by the Pacific Island Forum to talk about U.S. Pacific trade and ways that we can further grow that trade. But he came away really quite bullish about the prospects for us to expand trade and investment relations with Fiji. And we do have, at the embassy, we have a section that deals with economic and commercial affairs. There are some programs available where we can provide some trade facilitation assistance and help organize workshops and things of that sort. And we do work very, very closely with the U.S.-Fiji Business Council. So, in fact, I'll be seeing them all in a few weeks, but we do meet regularly with them, and we look, we consult with them, and we look for ways we can support their work they're doing. Of course, ultimately, yes, this is, free enterprise, so, we look for them to, the companies to do their business, but we do work and consult very closely with them.
You said so yourself, agriculture is the strong point for Fiji. Therein also come issues of quarantine and biosecurity and whatnot. Is this something that we haven't publicly heard of any issues with Fijian products going into the US? But is it a concern for the US government when exports come in from Fiji?
I think that the U.S. as Fiji have quite strict biosecurity regulations, and there is a process that companies have to go through to get approval for agricultural products coming into the United States. But certainly those products that are coming into the United States are, that process is in place and is working very smoothly. And should there be future, new types of agricultural products that Fiji would like to export to the United States, they would just have to go through the same approval process. But as I say, we've established the fact that it can work quite successfully. I think that we also potentially could look at, potentially expanding the market here for some U.S. agricultural products, including meat products. And I think that would be something we'd be very interested in talking to, the appropriate authorities about in the future.
Distance is an issue, isn't it?
That's true. Of course, yeah, you do have to factor in the transportation costs, so that, it can be inhibiting for certainly some smaller quantity products. But one of the products that is very successful also is mahogany wood products. We have a couple of U.S. companies here working in wood, sustainable forestry, and that's another area where, it's very important, I think, to protect that brand for Fiji, to continue to take the appropriate steps to make sure that, everything is being done in accordance with, sustainable forestry methods. And I understand that wood is what's used by some of the most prestigious guitar-making companies in the U.S. to manufacture their guitars. So that's another area that's been, to date quite successful.
Okay, and with that, Ambassador, we've come to the end of another segment. It's time to take another break. We'll be back shortly. Good evening. We're just about to wrap up for the evening, but we still have Dr. Roland Kumar and Asena with us. We will, for the next few minutes, continue discussions on breast cancer. Asena, you've had surgeries. Do you today feel any less of a woman because of the mastectomy?
I feel good. I've changed my mindset completely and talk to myself and say, you are still beautiful. My family, they are very happy. My husband is very happy, very supportive. I'm continuing with my studies. I'm hoping to graduate this year for my Bachelor of Divinity. Yes, I do my housework normally, and yeah, I don't feel outplaced when I had this operation.
For any woman out there who may have this fear that they don't want to have their breast removed, I mean, you're a classic example of how a healthy, robust woman can carry on with her life, isn't it? Even if they have had their breast removed.
Yes, they should look positively into this treatment. Yes.
Doc, self-examination is something that the Ministry and Health Services focuses on quite a bit, detecting lumps early on. Could you, give us a quick demo on how a breast examination is done?
Now, the way we would advise the breast examination to be done is for the lady to be comfortable. And if she's not comfortable just being in a room, shower is the best place to examine. The ways that can be examined is firstly, with the hands on the side, have a look at yourself in the mirror. See if the breasts look normal. If they look the same on both sides. If there's an area which is puckered around a bit, if there's an area which looks a bit swollen, those are things that they can just have a look at. And examination with the hands on the side firstly. feel, as long as it doesn't matter how you go about feeling the breast, as long as the whole breast is covered. The other ways is getting the hands up in the air and examining under the armpit. So as long as the whole breast is covered, that should be a complete breast examination. But I must say that just the breast self-examination nowadays, with the availability of other tests, is not a complete examination. So if you're worried at all, come and see a doctor. Let the doctor examine you, and then carry on further tests like having a scan or having a mammogram for you. But breast examinations are where everyone can start with.
Last question. What is the difference between early detection and late detection?
So early detection would be typically on a mammogram, getting to picking up ladies with breast cancer on a mammogram, rather than having to feel a lump. Once you start to feel a lump, that lump is at least a centimeter or centimeter and a half before you start to feel it. So where we would like to get these lumps is at the mammogram stage, where a woman is a bit worried that someone in the family has had a cancer. She might be a bit worried, get her in, get a mammogram, and move from there on. Rather than getting a lump which is 1.5 centimeters, 2 centimeters, or what we see here is 10, 15 centimeter lumps, which are masses by then, and those are quite late stages.
And what difference does it make having early detection and late detection?
So with early detections, the cure rates are much, much higher. So they are stage 1 or 2 disease rather than having a stage 4 disease. So by the time you detect a lump at small, when they are small, you can do a few things differently. You can do breast conserving therapy. So you do smaller surgeries. You don't necessarily have to take the whole breast out. And then that has to be followed by radiotherapy, of course. But if it's at late stage, remember the operation is always harder with bigger lumps, and that means that the breast has to go. The chances that those lumps have spread elsewhere are much, much higher.
Okay, and with that, Doc, that's the end of our show tonight. Asena, I'd like to thank you, and Doc, you as well. Thank you very much for being on the show tonight. And here's hoping that we've made a difference in somebody's life tonight. That is it for the show for this evening, but if you have any comments or questions, you can email us for the record at fbc.com.fj. Up next is Nemani Ndela Mbatiki with his weekly segment. From me, for now, good evening. I'll see you next Sunday.